welcome, Mike, to Singapore. You and I have the exciting prospect of hosting the session right after lunch. So, and after that heavy lunch, a lot of pressure, specifically on you. So, welcome.
We'll see how we do by who's asleep. Okay.
Today I was coming in the morning to the event, and I think again I heard this in the introduction that Bhaskar just made for the session. Keep hearing the word cyber attack. Keep hearing how millions and millions of dollars have been lost, and keep hearing statistics of how 2024, in terms of specifically cyber attacks, this is the percentage of growth this is happening. This is how it looks different from 2023. Love to just kickstart this discussion, getting your perspective on how you seeing this space evolve. Specifically, given all the credentials that BitGo has within this space, how are you seeing, a place where this topic is getting more and more mainstream? I think it's completely mainstream today, but is it getting the necessary attention? And how are you seeing the broader digital custody landscape evolving?
Okay, well, that's a very large topic. Let's see, on key material for secrets, certainly I think the technological industry has proven that we're not very good at data privacy, keeping secrets, etc. I do remember hearing years ago, humans are not good at keeping private keys, full stop, right? Over time, they will always fail. And we're obviously trying to combat that and eliminate single points of failure. We're making some inroads on it, but we're also in an industry, so certainly with the crypto industry, we have a lot of young players, a lot of companies that are starting, they're small, they may not have the resources to protect billions of dollars, and then they want to build a product that goes from zero to billions of dollars in a very short period of time. So this particular failure has happened over and over again. You might remember a few years ago, there was an exchange called CoinCheck in Japan, and they lost somewhere around $600 million of a coin called NEM coins, and they were holding it in a single signature, online hot wallet. And it doesn't take a cybersecurity genius to recognize that maybe that wasn't the right way to hold $600 million. But what happened? What happened was they started with a wallet that had nothing in it, which I would argue, single sig, hot wallet, nothing in it, that's pretty secure. But then they went about their job of growing their business, and their business grew and went from 0 to 5 million to 10 million to 50 million. I'm quite confident that all through this period, the technology team behind it is like, hey, we got to figure something else out. We got to use cold storage. We got to use more keys. We got to do whatever. But they didn't have time. And if you went to Tokyo at that time, you would have seen CoinCheck plastered all over, like every billboard, all the electronic signs, etc. They were growing their business. And sure enough, it didn't take very long. And then they were hacked, and they lost $600 million. Amazingly, the industry was so lucrative that they paid all their clients back. So it had a semi-happy ending, I guess. But it goes to show that, like, when it comes to cybersecurity, A, we're not very good about it to begin with. The basic premise, eliminate single points of failure. But then secondarily, you're never done. You got to keep up in the game. And the types of resources used to secure small amounts of money, whether that's $1 or $10 million, is different than billions. So anyway, this is an ongoing battle. I think it's especially difficult when you have innovative firms that are trying to grow out of nothing with small budgets. I can probably list 3 other examples of similar types of failures where, like, they sort of got it right, but they didn't have the resources to fully do it. And then as the asset grew in size, they ended up with a failure.
So are you seeing this industry to be very reactive? There's a breach X that happens, and there's almost a flurry of activities, including initiatives by companies happening. And I guess let me put it a bit differently, that if that is the case, like, what would it take to make it maybe more proactive?
It's a good point. No, I don't think we're as good as we should be. Like, we do not see root cause analysis really broadly shared. There's some hacks where you do see that coming out, and then a lot of times you don't. There's embarrassment, fear of liability, what's going to happen in the courts after, in the wake of whatever the breach was. There's hidden breaches that people don't disclose at all. And then you're always kind of wondering, like, well, how does the industry get better? There are some industry groups. There are some back channels. The larger companies that have chief security officers are often getting together, collaborating, and sharing some of these stories. But it's not nearly as universal as it should be. I probably have a lot of engineers here. How many engineers? Okay, there's like one. All right. No, okay, there we go. There we go. So, I mean, from the engineering side, when we have failures in our operational systems, we always do RCAs, right? We expect it. And yet when it comes to security, it's hit and miss for sure.
So there's a lot that's happening at BitGo. You've been in the news, and it's always a worrying statement when somebody says you've been in the news, but only for good things. There are obviously different custody solutions that you've started offering. You've had multisig in the past. I'm curious to know, seeing some of the recent news, like I said, coming out of BitGo. You've also started offering MPC solution. What are your views on these, the different offerings? Put it differently, why did you decide to go for MPC?
Well, sure. I mean, look, we protect digital assets, and we protect billions of dollars worth of digital assets. It's our job, and our clients expect us to pull out all the stops to protect that asset as it grows, regardless of what size it is. So, look, we started the company back in 2013. At the time, people were getting hacked individually, then they put into web wallets, they get rug pulled, like all these problems are happening. It was all single signature stuff, single point of failure. So I thought there had to be a better way. I found a little corner of Bitcoin called P2SH, which is the underpinnings of multisig. Worked with Bitcoin wizards at the time, which was kind of the early Bitcoin devs. They were very supportive. They were great. And then on we went. But like, if you just apply basic fundamentals of security, eliminate single points of failure, you have to do that. So great. Now Bitcoin and some blockchains, heck, even Ripple's XRP, they support native on-chain multi-signature. There's a lot of goodness to that. You can use really simple cryptography. You can do it completely independently on different machines with different implementations and have a lot of safety. Other blockchains, even though they are newer, did not implement on-chain multi-signature. And by the way, there's no cost reason not to do it. I mean, doing 3 signatures is cheap, super easy. Doing 5, easy. You can do that too. But nonetheless, they didn't. So, all right, we have to figure out how are we going to eliminate the single points of failure of a single key. MPC has proven to be like a good way to do that. The other thing is we're using ECDSA on Ethereum and a number of these blockchains, which doesn't afford a lot of flexibility. It's not the greatest signature format, but there you have it. So look, MPC, if you're doing high transactional wallets, it allows you to get the efficiencies that you need in order to do those transactions at costs that make sense and also eliminate the single points of failure.
What are some of the key, I mean, once you did decide to go with MPC, what are some of the factors which helped you sort of, prioritize, I guess, when it comes to actual performance? Like, what are some of the key aspects in the MPC solution that you were looking at?
So BitGo does this 2 out of 3 M of N solution everywhere. And this starts all the way back to just thinking about how do you build a self-custody wallet. There's a lot of other MPC providers doing 3 out of 3 and things like that. I'll talk about it in a second. But we think the 2 out of 3 is important because it protects against both theft and loss. So everybody worries about theft, getting hacked, all that's legitimate. But there's just as much loss that happens out there. And the 2 out of 3 model always provides this kind of backup key. When you think about the human element that goes into self-custody, so BitGo can hold 1 key. That's our co-signing key. We can put policies behind that, HSMs. We do all kinds of good stuff. And then you got the other 2 keys. Look, users are good at kind of holding one that's kind of their signing key, and they can protect that, and they can figure out how to deal with that. The other one, is a backup key. If you try to go to models beyond 2 out of 3, which also still protect against both theft and loss, you end up with the next step was like 3 out of 5. So, Casa does this for Bitcoin. I mean, you can't refute that 3 out of 5 gives an extra layer of protection over 2 of 3, but it comes at a pretty extreme complexity. So now you've got to condition users to figure out how to deal with 3 keys in order to stay self-custodial instead of 2. And that's just a really difficult usability versus security problem. So anyway, as we went in to look for MPC solutions, look, we think the 2 out of 3 is imperative. And, the 3 out of 3 model has had proven failures on the backup key. Basically, Once you use a 3 out of 3 solution, a lot of people ignore the backup problem entirely. They may not know it. They're hiring somebody to do their security, and they don't really understand the full details of this. But as far as I know, I think BitGo is the only provider that has stayed true to doing 2 out of 3 everywhere. So when you use our self-custodial wallet layer, it's always 2 or 3. We will use the best technology for the blockchain that we're on. So on Bitcoin, that's going to be multi-sig native on-chain. For cold storage Ethereum, we're going to use a smart contract multi-sig capability for that. And then for hot wallets, we'll use MPC, where it's appropriate. So again, it's our job to pull out all the stops and do whatever's best depending on the asset that we're securing. Back to your question with MPC, when you start looking for true threshold signature stuff, the implementations get a lot weaker. Suddenly, there's not a lot out there that handles it at all, or then secondarily handles it in a performant way. Our clients all have expectations that it's the modern era, that MPC is like trivial computation. They think that it should happen within sub-second timeframes. But if you start doing threshold signature with any large variant, most of the implementations start to fall apart. You can very quickly get up into 20, 30-second signature times. You probably heard of this. Some of you probably play with this. That's a big problem.
There's also a lot of talk about speed being an important factor. Obviously, I think I guess I have 2 questions over here. One is talking about 2 by 3. Are you, I would say post the launch, seeing that to be good enough at this time? Or do you see that eventually there's a move that needs to go beyond that, which may still be a limited case? That's, I guess, the first question. And or maybe I'll just take this.
Yeah, it's a good question, right? So like these massive, MPC or massive multi-sig, a lot of people are excited about those. Can we do, 30 out of 50 or whatnot? And there's certain applications where that works. I mean, for us, where we're, mostly doing custody, we got 2 things. We got the self-custody layer, where it's 2 out of 3. The reason we do that is because humans can wrap their heads around 2 out of 3 and how to secure those keys, and they can run their own wallets. That's different than the use case of, say, a foundation that may have a bunch of validators that's going to do a massive MPC. On top of that, we've got the custody layer. The custody layer ends up being a combination of security, but then also the audits, the operational controls, the backup systems. No single person can, take it on their own. No single person dying could cause you to lose it, all these types of things. So what you do is you take those 3 keys or key shards, whichever one it may be, and each of those is then separately chopped up and divvied up in different types of ways. And there's different things that you do for the online components, for the cold storage components, for the backup components. But the heavy duty when it comes to custody here is really all the process and procedures around that. Remember, it's like super easy to set up an MPC system kind of here now. You've got 5 guys that work at the company, and you're going to split up a certain way, but one of them decides to quit. Well, now what are you going to do? What's the secure procedure to get it switched to the new employee? By the way, MPC also provides some much better attributes here than like multi-signature does, in that you can rotate, right? But in general, it's all those operational procedures that end up being the complicated part of custody. And so 2 or 3 still works pretty well, but we will get to more.
So I think just on top of that, 2 specific areas, love to get your perspective now that you have the solution in market. How important is open source and the fact that there is an aspect of transparency in place? And I guess secondly, is speed, because there's always this healthy debate. In fact, we have a session a bit later that speed gets significantly impacted in MPC versus, say, other solutions. From your experience, what are you seeing both from an open source transparency point of view, and also where does speed come in?
Open source, I think, is critical. Of course, we want as much scrutiny of the implementations as we can possibly get. Even though MPC has been used pretty heavily for a few years inside of crypto, at this point, just go to Black Hat, right? And you'll see that plenty of implementations have had plenty of flaws. So I think you just want to have as max scrutiny as you can get. Then with open source, some people from the business side are worried about it. BitGo has always actually put our cryptography portions out for review and audit, and we will continue to do that because we do think it's important. Let's see, on speed was your second question? Speed, look, the client has expectations. There's some serialization of transactions that happens with certain blockchains. It's more blockchain specific than generalized, but you do have to be able to hit a certain speed just in order to hit throughputs. Some chains have batching capabilities and multi-send, send to many type of capabilities. Others don't. That ends up affecting performance just of how fast you need to get transactions out. And then as a result of that, what your signing times are become critical, both for user expectation and then also ability to hit throughputs. So I would say it's of extreme importance. I think if you just implement like the basic, MPCs in a kind of naive way, you will end up with a signing time that takes too long. The other part I think that might fit into here is cold storage. And in a way, this gets back to your, should we be using massive MPCs or not? So cold storage, like versus hot storage. I mean, some people want to say, hey, look, you put it all online with a massive MPC and it's as good as cold storage. I don't know that we're there yet. So, if you're using a massive MPC and you're trying to automate the whole thing, well, now it comes down to who controls the robo-signer, right? And if you can hack that, then you can still get through the big massive MPC. So I think you've missed the point. We're heavy believers for the large amounts of asset that you need to use cold storage. Okay, well then what is cold storage? Is it 1 out of 20 keys being cold, or is it 11 out of 20 keys being cold? And that becomes the new challenge. Of course, doing multiple cold storage signings gets increasingly linearly expensive with the number that you do, so that ends up impacting it. And of course, cold storage is going to be slower to sign from an SLA perspective. It's not a technology perspective, but yeah, that becomes a problem. Anyway, on cold storage, one last thing, MPC has a real handicap here, right? So MPC is iterative. There's some that are experimenting, probably in this room, with pre-computation of many of those iterations and saving that, scrolling away. That potentially introduces new security risks that you have to worry about. And then, of course, cold storage going back and forth 8 times is just completely asinine. You wouldn't want to have that job.
Fair enough. Now that you do have the solution in market, just I guess pivoting the discussion a bit, any specific challenges that you're seeing? There's obviously a lot of good movement that is there, but challenges maybe more from an adoption perspective, sometimes even maybe more of a mindset perspective. How are you seeing the MPC rollout?
No, I think customers are quite comfortable with it. So, like we have our technology selections that we do, and then there's the process and procedures, how you operate, what type of audits that you do on your own software, on the cryptography components. You have to put all that together. So certainly for the large holders, like we just announced that 21 Shares ARC is doing their ETF with us. I mean, the diligence reviews that these guys do is months of work, and it's tremendous amount of look. They come and look at the vaults, they look at the operational procedures. So there's a lot outside of the tech that we have to do, which probably consumes more time than the tech itself. But people are quite comfortable with the tech so long as you've got the safeguards around it.
Got it. So, I mean, we were talking about this outside, but love to get your perspective of what a truly global interoperable service looks like. And I'd love to get a bit of a regulatory flavor in that, but I'll let you first take away.
Great question. So we're in a little bit of scrutiny right now. Many of you might know that we are the custody provider for Wrap Bitcoin. It's about $10 billion of Bitcoin that's owned by the WBTC DAO, and currently we hold that with 3 keys in a multi-signature format inside the United States. We provide real-time proof of reserves. We've been doing this for 7 years since its inception without a hitch. There's some nervousness about having a single point of failure with a regulator. In this case, it would be the U.S. And what if the U.S. regulator decided, hey, we don't like this activity, and maybe it's not even what we're doing. Maybe it's they don't like DeFi, and it turns out that Wrap Bitcoin is a tremendous percentage of like the value locked inside of all DeFi. So we become a single point of failure, both from a institutional perspective and then also from a jurisdictional perspective. So we are trying to move that out. We're going to put a key in Hong Kong, key in Singapore, key in the U.S. Some people are criticizing, and look, the skepticism about how you do that is great. We want that type of, it's kind of like open source. You want people to know what you're doing and to poke holes at it. That's how you make things secure. But We very much think that actually splitting these keys globally is an important part of protecting it for the future. And then that dovetails to the next question, which is regulatory. So regulators have not ever had to have oversight of an asset that can be held by multiple parties at the same time. So it's kind of mind blown for them. Like, wait a minute, you mean the money is both at Wells Fargo and Bank of America? But yes, we can actually do that now. And so this is causing them to look and scrutinize, where do they want the keys? And if you're Switzerland and you're like, hey, put all the keys in Switzerland, well, that's kind of a tiny geography. Monaco used to do a ton of financial activity. Imagine putting all the keys in Monaco with no military whatsoever. Like, how are you going to protect that from physical threats? Good luck. So, look, when we do our multi-sigs, our MPCs, all keys are held at least 1,000 miles apart. We're able to get insurance on this because our insurance underwriters know exactly how it works. All right, anyway, I'm digressing, but your question about regulators, their instinct is they want it all in one region. And I think in the end, they're not going to want that. And it's not good for end users, it's not good for businesses, it's not good for custodians, but it's going to take some time to kind of have them walk through, like, we want control, we want sanctions, we want our policies on top of this, and if it's in multiple places, we're not sure how to do that.
Yeah, and I think having all sets of keys actually in one place, kind of, you're almost going back to square one, right? Because the entire idea is to have this distributed, like you're saying. So really, when we're thinking about regulatory actions or governance across different parts of the world, are you seeing a sense of convergence?
Yes, like
Is it fast enough?
So if you break down regulation, and the problem is that it's a small word, but it means a boatload of stuff. So you can break it, I think, into three groups. One is law enforcement related stuff. This would be like AML, KYC, transaction monitoring, sanctions controls. This one is super easy, but every regulator's got their own variant of that. Obviously, you can kind of abstract that away, kind of do the maximum, and then it works pretty much everywhere. Most of the licenses that we acquire, and I don't know how many we probably have 60 or 70 licenses. We usually acquire a new license and we do nothing in terms of changing our operational controls, which means that particular jurisdiction did not require anything new beyond what we're already doing. The second area of second part of regulation would be like investor protections. This is like in the US what the SEC does, making sure that, hey, if somebody's selling you something, they're not dumping it behind your back, that you know exactly how it works, all this type of stuff. That doesn't affect us very much. And then the third one would be like market structure. And to some degree, we spend a lot of time thinking about MPC, multi-sig, and these kind of individual points, and yet market structure is this massive missing point, which is if you look at trading markets in any jurisdiction around the world, you will see a group of different network participants, from broker-dealers to exchanges to clearinghouses, custodians, and banks, and these all work together to protect the asset. And by the way, it's a systems type problem. I mean, computer science people are great at this stuff. But they've created a robust place where you can trade. The risk in each of those different entities is kind of known. The regulator makes sure that you're kind of staying within the bounds of your risk. The purpose is to make sure that the market itself can't go down, right? So it's one thing to have like an investor protection where Apple didn't disclose blah, blah, blah to their investors and their investors were not treated fairly. It's a way worse thing if the entire NASDAQ goes down, right? So when it comes to crypto, this form of regulation is missing, and that was evidenced by FTX, right? FTX blows up $8 billion, thousands of clients, millions of end users, all failed. So anyway, I'm probably a little bit away from your question. You asked about regulation, and there's so much that goes into it. But yeah, it is mostly common across the different geographies. They want little variances.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure, regulation itself, like you said, it's something we can, probably need another few days, probably this whole week to cover that topic. But I want to go back on something which you mentioned earlier. Firstly, congratulations on the news and on the ETFs, et cetera, that are now on board. Curious to know, when you're thinking of collaboration, how are you seeing, how are you seeing the role of custodians such as yourself evolving, given all these developments? And is there also a sense of cooperation with some of the traditional custodians that exist?
Well, we're just trying to replicate and build globally this layer up. It starts at secure wallet platforms, and then it's custody, and then services like staking and liquidity and borrow and lend, and settlement and whatnot. We're trying to build that globally. That takes a long time. So I'd say we're so much on the basics that actually, in terms of interoperability, that doesn't come up very much at all. I think the public ledgers actually provide kind of the interoperability that we have between institutions. You can easily send your money from Bitstamp to Coinbase, and you don't have to have any wallet layer or custodial layer interop. It's the blockchain that does that component. The second part of your question was
just cooperation with even traditional
finance. Traditional finance is still kind of stymied. I mean, most of my experience would be U.S. based. We have a political system today which is blocking crypto growth, and it's quite clear that it starts at the president. So until that changes, all of the traditional firms are heavily regulated. They are not sure what to do. For those of you that are from Silicon Valley, you've probably read a book, Innovator's Dilemma. It's interesting, in people here doing innovation and like crazy technology stuff. You read this book about like why is it that these small little startups can tackle these Goliaths. Nobody on Wall Street reads that book. And it's because they've got so much regulation protecting them, this huge regulatory moat. They haven't had to worry about it. They've been immune. They've been like living on the Galapagos Islands, and they've never seen a predator before. But of course, we from Silicon Valley are absolutely here to eat their lunch. We are over their moats and scaling their walls and taking it down. I think it'll be interesting to see if they can kind of come into the space fast enough to not just get overtaken. But I think history has told us that the innovator's dilemma means the innovator wins in the end. So I think this is great news, because I bet if we do a poll here about who loves their bank versus who doesn't, we'll probably find more of the latter than the former, and it's ripe for innovation.
Fair enough. I think obviously the landscape is significantly evolving, specifically in the US. Was it 40 days to elections, 45 days?
So something like that. We'll see. Yeah, if you're voting, there's only one side you should be voting if you're in this room.
The right side. Okay.
Not the wrong side.
All right. I guess just a couple of questions to round this up. One, given all the recent development, what are some of your, it's going to be very open-ended, so, I mean, completely leave it to you how you want to answer this, but, with the next, say, 6 to 12 months, what are the key areas which you're looking at doubling down? Where do you see the biggest opportunity within the custody space?
Well, let's see. There's the business answer, which is probably continuing to, meet the needs of the market and things like that. I think for this audience, I might hit something a little bit different. There's a lot of debate about centralization, decentralization, self-custody versus custody. Look, it takes a lot of work. So if you're in this room, I suspect you're probably excited that we at least have the option of self-custody and decentralization. It's really hard to maintain it over time. Companies get big, and they build a moat, and they stop caring as much. I don't want to name competitors, but you probably, if you're watching on some of the stuff that's going on, some folks in the space are like, hey, we don't need to do proof of reserves. We're audited. We're a public company. And it's like, whoa, wait, really? Like, that didn't work in 2008, right? We had a lot of public companies that were audited. Go tell Lehman Brothers, I guess, that's enough to know where the assets are. So I think it's a really hard battle to actually make decentralization and or self-custody work over time. So it's imperative, actually, that the innovators keep coming and keep providing this. We are not good at handling key material, like we said in the intro here, right? And we have to fix that. I mean, I feel 10 years into the industry, have we kind of failed to not handle the basics of how we prevent keys from getting lost? Because we're now falling prey to silly attacks, phishing, right? Supply chain management attacks. There's always kind of a new set of them. We have not really mastered this yet. So look, I think there's a lot of focus for the next 12 to 18 months we can do on that. The second one I would say is data privacy. Also an area people they care about, but they don't. So I'm a big fan of Bitcoin, nearly a Bitcoin maximalist. But one of the things I cite that I really don't like about Bitcoin is that it's all public. Your transactions are there forever. Can we have privacy-enabled public blockchains? We ought to be able to have it. Now, what's it going to take? and really, put the blame on me and some of the other guys that started back in the first generation of crypto companies. We're so busy just trying to get our custodians, our exchanges, or whatever going that we opted out on solving the problem of privacy. And it's not solved to this day, 10 years later. By the way, we've seen this lesson before. So I was at Google. I'm the author of the HTTP 2.0 protocol. And there was a guy named Vint Cerf there. You guys know who Vint Cerf is? Father of the internet, TCP/IP, right? And all the way back in the 70s, of course, they were thinking about security. It should be in the transport. And they didn't put it in the transport because it'd be too hard. It was so much difficulty just getting like UCLA to talk to UC Berkeley or Stanford that, of course, they left it out, clear text protocols. Here we are today. We still don't have security underneath the transport layer. And this is causing real problems. So basically, anybody can muck with your reliable transport because there's nothing secured about it. And we haven't really figured out how to solve this. Quick makes a little bit of inroads here, but not much. It goes to show that just like security and privacy will be left as afterthoughts unless the technologists really push to make it happen. And we're pretty damn slow.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, so 100%. So I think to kind of round this up, I mean, you've, Mike, built BitGo into such a successful enterprise. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of lessons. There's a lot of academia and industry strength in this room. And I go back to what we discussed earlier, where we said that, specifically when it comes to security, it is often still more of a reactive discussion rather than an active, proactive one. Any suggestions, any key pointers, maybe 3 pointers you'd love to tell just the broader audience in terms of how one can kind of pivot the conversation within this broader space?
Well, look, I think some things are taking care of itself here. I don't want to be all negative on it. What I mean is like actually, I'm close to Stanford, right? And we got Dan Bonet over there. Many of you, I'm sure, know him. He's been at Stanford for, I don't know, a long time. And he describes a tale of, it used to be cryptography, okay, in the computer science department. It's like the small thing, like nobody goes. Now he's like the most popular professor on campus. And why is that? It's because we've got use cases that are using PKI technology we haven't seen for a long time. So I think there's a lot that's already happening just in terms of the amount of research that's going into this space. So I think continue with the first principles approach to how you do security. We want to continue to eliminate single points of failure. We need to be public, as you mentioned, open source. We need to continue to do that with our implementations. And frankly, engineers and security researchers, they are the level-headed ones about how to solve problems for the long term. The business people, I think, like I said, they get more caught up in some business realities and who's responsible and liabilities and things like that. So anyway, all the researchers here will keep them honest. I do think we can create industry groups, best practices. I do think that we can make sure that companies like BitGo, Coinbase, others are held to account, that we are actually doing the best practices that we talked about at the beginning, and then even as we get bigger, do we still maintain that ethos? So hold us accountable and call us out.
Really appreciate your honest and very, very passionate view on this. So
actually, let me give you one example on this. So back to Wrap Bitcoin. Wrap Bitcoin is it's a smart contract, and the smart contract is controlled by a multi-sig. And it's like, I don't know, 9 out of 18 or 11 out of 18 or something like that. And we created it back in 2017 when we launched Wrap Bitcoin. And the companies that created it, there was Ren Protocol was in there, and Kyber, and a bunch of others that deserve a ton of credit for helping make it work. But then like 2 years ago, this guy on Twitter, he keeps bugging me. He's like, you guys lost the keys. So we hadn't had to do any governance decisions. We hadn't done any signings on this multisig for years. And he's like, you don't have the keys. And so he just keeps bugging me. Of course, we did have the keys, but he was right that like some of those parties were no longer around. And maintaining that multisig over time requires some amount of ongoing attestation. Really, you should be doing it kind of every year to prove that you have everything. And if you don't have something, you should be public about it. All right, good news is, it took us a while. By the way, it's just a pain in the neck to get 11 people to go sign a message. But we did eventually get it. We kind of actually rotated. There were some guys that were no longer holding those keys. He was right about that. That's holding us to account.
No, that's, I mean, I think in that way you are leading by example, purely because Yeah, I mean, I think just with custody also comes the responsibility, and it's great to hear you, specifically stress on accountability, transparency. So yeah, really appreciate this, Mike. Thank you again for this conversation. Really appreciate this. A round of applause for Mike, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for all you're doing with the research and pushing forward on this MPC. Like, there's so much riding on the work that researchers are doing in this room. So thank you guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mike. That was a great fireside chat.